Okay, thank you so much for having me. My name is Yvette Gonzalez, and I am based in Germany, but I'm working internationally. Next slide. I'm going to talk about a recent mission. I mean, we all work on analogs, and in the past, for decades, a lot of these space analogs have been meant for learning, scientific discovery, and how can we apply any solutions to Earth and to space, right? So I recently was, in fact, a week ago, in a cave analog with this team here, and it was based in Portugal, the Azores, in a cave, a lava tube cave in Terceira Island. And these are the team that came together. We are Portuguese, American, and Austrian. Next slide. And this team was selected because of their unique relationships, having worked with each other before, but also because a lot of what we're doing kind of comes together and integrates. So we're examining critical climate history, geotechnical tools for discovering that information, looking at microbiology, and we all in some way or shape have worked together before. Next slide. But also because lava tube caves offer us the ability to look at what it would be like to live in a lava tube cave, either on the moon or other planetary bodies. And so it was really a focus on lunar habitability. And here you can see we are located, I don't know if you know where the Azores are, but if you look at the map, it is literally in the middle of the ocean. It is almost equidistant to the US and to Portugal, closer to Portugal, but it's also portions of it are on the tectonic plates that are separated. Next slide. And within the cave, here's the outside of I wanted you to see the biodiversity on the outside of the cave. Next slide. And the setup for us was putting these Red Cross tents, and mission control was literally 24 hours outside. The building was our base camp. But then next slide, you will see actually our actual living was within this cave structure. And it's much larger than this. I just kind of did a little portion of it. And that section right above mission control, that kind of cavity, was where we actually lived. That was our tents. That was our laboratory. We had a tent with a laboratory in there. And the idea, next slide, was that if we can do, this is the lake that's on top of it as well. So you get a perspective of the fact that we knew there was a large body of water on top of us. Next slide. And that made the conditions extremely wet, extremely damp. And we were cognizant that there was this kind of diversity and mineralization on top, but what does that mean inside of a cave, and what does that mean for the future of space research? And then what can that tell us about climate history and the journey that the Earth takes in certain parts of the Earth and the planet over time, and how is it affected by many factors? Excuse me. So we set up our tents. This is within the cave. Next slide. Some of these tents were like this ability to glow in the darkness of the cave, and then some were blackout. So the next slide. And you will see, for example, that was mine on the right, which was normally a blackout tent. So we actually, when we purchased these, we weren't sure. So we were testing also what kind of privacy we would give each other. Next slide. Within the schedule that we had, I will say this video really shows the endemic dampness and rain that was happening. It's a bit slow, but basically it's constantly raining and dripping in this cave. And we didn't anticipate that. So it offered conditions that really showed us how the weather, how other factors in nature can affect the actual habitat itself. Next slide. And what we realized was that in the best conditions that we had during this mission was already damp, already extremely humid, like 90 to 100% humidity, and temperatures varying between anywhere between 13 to 18 degrees Celsius, and mostly on the lower side because we didn't anticipate how chilly it would be given the conditions that were in there. And there was only one day where there was absolute flooding from above within the cave, and this is the entrance to the cave. So there is a base camp and then a staircase going in, because during a normal time, this is a tourist cave. And so we chose this because we didn't want to disrupt or contaminate a virgin cave. And so we got environmental permission to be here. And later you can actually see this in real time, but you can see it's raining and gushing. And so our objective on a day like this was to ensure safety and then look at any rocks that had been dislodged. And then once the entire cave had been inspected and CO2 levels were deemed safe, we continued to do work. And in fact, this offered a new way for us to look at behavior of running water, behavior of biology, new fungi that had probably sprung to life within 12 hours of this rain, and also new crevices where the water was going. So it offered a really nice pivot for our focus of all our research. Next slide. But so what were we doing? We had human health and science experiments. We had research on microbiology. We had research on geology, geotechnical, geophysical, and seismic. So we were doing anything from a range of here where you see samples being taken of life, freezing them in nitrogen and liquid nitrogen, and then they will stay in Portugal, all the samples, for DNA sequencing, for inspection and investigations, and at an Azorian and Portugal-based university labs. The other one on top is a UV light on a fungi that was ready to reproduce. And at the bottom is one of our colleagues who was trying to get through small crevices to take samples of loose rock deeper into the cave so we could take a look at loose rock and the evolution over time. Next slide. And so the important thing to understand is that the environmental permissions allowed us, parameters to conduct all this research, and only loose rock was allowed to be sampled and kept in Portugal, and only visible biological life samples were allowed and to be kept in Portugal. And that was something we had to get permission for. So when we consider the kind of right here, you see the lab inside the cave, which is pretty cool and pretty phenomenal, given that we could not disturb the rest of the cave. And then on the right, you have a Faro scanner, which we took over almost 1,700 scans over 7 days to create the first 3D model of the cave. Next slide. And what we're trying to do is, through these investigations, through this kind of sampling, through these measurements, rock hardness, seismic, is not only understand the nature of this cave in particular, but related to the history of Azorian scientists who've looked at climate change in this area, and what can we attribute to changes in atmospheric pressure, what can we attribute to the change in landscape, seismic activity across the island, and also every other environmental factor that has evolved over time, including exposure to human tourists in this environment. How has it changed the ecosystem? Next slide. And the interesting thing, this is the team, is that we were not only conducting the research, we were actually sharing in real time with Portuguese schools, with Azorian schools, because students were really interested in how their local ecosystem matters and how climate is changing in their environment. Next slide. And so it was rather novel for them to have a group of analog researchers and astronauts living in a cave right around the corner, and that we were actually doing something pretty highly impactful and high fidelity. In this picture on the left, that's me exploring before we started the analog. We were looking at the wet conditions, where we're going to put our tents, and how we were going to set up logistics for optimal data collection. And on the right, you have our geotechnical team setting up a seismic measure that would look at reverberations in the rocks. Next slide. So all of the things that we were collecting are leading to an abundance of analysis now that we have ahead of us. But these are some of the top priorities we have. We definitely are starting our publications. We have a lot of new information that we're adding to existing science and research that's been done for decades with Azorian and other Portugal-based scientists. And the great part of this journey for us is that they're on our advisory board. So we have technical experts who study not just this cave, but this island and this kind of ecosystem for many years. And so we're hoping we can add to it and kind of help to integrate that into a larger science and climate story. We're also trying to do storytelling and content for students and to share that in many languages. And we hope that out of this, a lot of the information that we are contributing can be available, right? That we're showing and showcasing that you can have an international collaboration and look at community-driven climate solutions using the data that we found. Next slide. And here I leave you just with a quote from the principal investigator for a NASA-funded project that was a few years ago. And we really hope that solving bigger problems about climate and different aspects of that, whether it's biological or water or geological, that we can come together through different countries, multiple disciplines, and that we can actually learn together and share that data as openly as we can, maintaining the sovereignty of a place and a community, so that we understand, okay, there have been scientists who've done this for many years, but here we can add to that and we can continue to grow that. Next slide. So if you have any questions, I know this is really brief because so much took place in those 7 days. Happy to answer your questions. Our team gets emails at this email, and we hope that we can contribute to other climate solutions and teams working around the world. Thank you.
Woohoo! That was beautiful.
Thank you.
If that's okay with you, I could like.
Of course.
Begin with my question. Okay, thank you. So, what are the parameters that when you plan for something like this? Because from what I understood, the key ingredient, rather the location, is that there should be a cave ultimately, right? For the analog mission itself. What are the things that you primarily look for to choose that particular cave as, okay, here, that's where the analog mission could be?
So that's a great question, because I think it's going to depend, right? One priority was not disturbing the environment, right? We didn't want to contaminate a very pristine cave, and we didn't want to disturb or in any way alter an existing landscape. So it was important for the lead team who started this idea it was 4 years ago, and Ana Pires and Rui Moura from Portugal, were having a conversation around specifically this island, specifically caves that have already been, quote unquote, contaminated by human interaction. And so I think it's a good lesson, and as part of what we're coming out of this with is, when you choose a tourist cave, it is because there's already been a contamination factor, right? And there's already been an alter in the ecosystem because of human interaction and many people passing through. You get, anywhere from 1 to 200 people potentially on a day, in a week. And that's a lot of, touching the walls. And I know they're not supposed to, but there are times when you almost fall over and you grab yourself and you're like, I touched the wall. So there was an understanding with the environmental directorate that, okay, we chose this so that we don't further hurt any other cave system. I think that's one factor. The other is, what is the purpose of your mission? What are you looking for? Are you looking for human habitability and interaction? And that's totally different. Are you looking just to look at behavior of people living together, or are you looking at a unique ecosystem? And so I think that comes into play too. The one that's done in Iceland with Chalice, they're looking at something very different, and that perspective is very useful. So for us, it's, what do you want to get out of it? What is the research you want? And what's the least amount of damage or contamination you can do to that part of the earth, I hope that answered your question.
Yes. Yep. Thank you.
And I will say the genesis for this one was from the Portugal team. They had already thought about this location, so it wasn't us going around the planet and trying to determine the best spot on Earth. It was, wow, there's this opportunity at this location for this biodiversity and this history, and they brought a team together that had the next layer of multiple disciplines to add value to that.
What are the major hurdles that you face? I mean, what would be like the topmost hurdle that you face?
I would say it's for any analog, especially an inaugural one, funding, right? You want to get the right blend of support without that dictating, and it did not at all in this case. I think for others, I would just say the right funding and support makes a big difference, because all of the sponsors that we had were completely supportive of our guidance on how it would happen, what science would come out of this, and what we would be collecting and why. I think a big lesson for other people in the future is just always be cognizant if you have sponsors, and this isn't self-funded or it's not funded by your university, that you understand the expectations from that funding so that it doesn't bias or skew your research approach. So funding is always the number one, right, for every mission.
True. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, nice to meet you, or meet you.
Yeah.
So I was wondering about this part mentioned about the environmental permits that you got. How easy or difficult was that? Because as far as I'm understanding, this is a tourist cave, so I guess that people come in and out during the same day, but you were staying there for a couple of days.
Mm-hmm. I will say it makes a big difference when you have established relationships. And the organization that we worked with, it's called Asociación Os Montañeros, which is a speleology group that for 60 years has managed and explored and done scientific discovery around all the islands. And we were just fortunate that they were interested to support and partner with us. And they have really trusted relationships. And I think that makes a big difference. So they knew what paperwork we needed to do. They knew what guidance we needed to follow. And so at every turn, we were asking them, what do we need? What permissions do we need? What do we need to respect? Please give us all the guidance that we need, because we don't want to disrespect the environment or anyone locally who has worked here. So I think that made a big difference. And even in a territory where you haven't been, it's really important to understand who's worked here before. And so the secondary thing was we were in contact with all of the technical experts and scientists who've worked here for over 40, 50 years. And they came and said, one even said, I slept in this when I was 20 years old in this cave before it was a tourist cave. And that was over 40 years ago. And so for him, it was exciting to see he can still give us his data and publications, and we can still learn from that now, and we can offer him an update on what we see now, what has evolved. And he was, this is a big part of what did you do that we should do, and what did you learn that we should learn? And a lot of care was taken to asking the local community and scientists what we should do and what our parameters were.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it was very fascinating. I would say we can't wait to share our results and publish and be at other conferences. This one I'm really grateful that came like within a week of coming out of the cave. Because very interestingly, a lot of the human health ones was, adjusting to UV light again so that we could use our computers and I could be doing this.
That's amazing.
Yeah, sharing, what it's like to be in darkness, and doing all these interviews, and on our webpage, we already have our statistics for all the research that we did. In fact, we're still adding to it. But if you look and you scroll down on our landing page, it's like statistics at a glance. And after we added up the last day we were there, like what we've done, we're like, no wonder we're so tired. It was really a Herculean effort to get, over 148 million scans of this, cave by a team of 3 geoscientists, right? It's amazing. All the microbiology that was collected and frozen and how much science we can get from that. Over 470 points of data in 7 days with 7 people for human health alone. And then you had other experiments. So it was really interesting in how we stayed very focused on our research, how we understood that the outcomes meant something for climate, they meant something for ongoing research on the island, how we honored this environment. It was really a very unique and special mission and team.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yvette, so much for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and hope we can share more and stay in touch with everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm more than happy to welcome you again in the future in our metaverse sessions.
Thank you. Thank you.